Nostalgia. It's a powerful thing when you think about it. How many times have you looked back fondly on something, conveniently forgetting all of the negatives that were so apparent at the time? It's the same thing with video games when you were a stupid child. I'm sure you were enthralled with certain video games, but as predictable as a cat with a laser pointer, children are easily entertained by flashing lights and loud noises, so perhaps these games aren't as good as we remember them to be. I mean, hell, at that age you could have shined a laser pointer and I'd have been more engaged than the cat, so the barrier for greatness wasn't exactly high. Today, I'm going to be looking at 3 video games to see if they hold up to the modern standard. More accurately, my modern standard. These 3 games are going to be from a nice little range, to try and reflect the varying ages that are present in the audience, so hopefully there's something for everyone. The games I'll be taking to task are Medieval 2 Total War, Mountain Blade Warband, and Starcraft. Now, the more keen-eyed amongst you will have spotted that each of these is a different type of strategy game, with the even more keen-eyed spotting that I've kept my word and picked games with release dates varying from 1998 to 2009, which should cover my ass with the title. Here's how this is going to work. I'm going to review each game individually with a mixture of post and live commentary to offer a scintillating insight into both my collective thoughts and how I was feeling in the moment. Clever, right? Before we get going, I'm sure I'm going to upset some people. This makes me happy. Nothing excites me more than the legions of unwashed commenters defending the honour of some pixels that they stared at to block out the sounds of their parents' divorce. So by all means comment your heart out. It's not going to change the fact that it was your fault. To start with, we're looking at Medieval 2 Total War. Released in 2006, this is regarded by some as the pinnacle of Total War games, and for many was an entrance into them. To try to emulate my experiences back in the day, I decided to play as England, because like all 8-year-old English boys, I dreamt of wiping the French off the face of the earth. Within seconds of starting a short campaign though, I was met with this. The camera moves with all the grace of a squirrel on crack cocaine. I ended up switching mice, but alas, the problem still persisted. Even the arrow keys didn't offer any respite. No matter, I was in the game and raring to go. It surprised me just how much of my old strategies I remembered, hours being poured into scouring a nascent internet for guides. I will say that the rebel system here is rather uninspired. To this day, I'm not sure why they didn't have a separate class of factions called the minor factions, have them unplayable, and therefore have Ireland and Brittany actually be nations. I mean, rebels? Who are they even rebelling against? They start at war with everyone. It's like a global anarchist movement. I do remember that you could make them a playable faction back in the day by changing a line or two of code, which was a great playthrough. Regardless, it was time to jump into a battle. One refreshing aspect of this game is just how simple the battles are. By all means call me a bit thick, but I do enjoy simplicity in this space. As technologies progress, more units are unlocked and recruited, giving us an interesting progression, but at the start it's you, a bunch of peasants with spears and the occasional bow. Having picked off all the rebel settlements I had my eye on, it was time to look at the second main element of the game. That of managing your settlements. This does feel rather lackluster. Simplicity in this side of things is not what I'm looking for. On a dynamic, ever-changing battle map then it works well, but on the static click and build part of the game, it feels rather empty and uninspired. There aren't really any hidden modifiers or anything interesting going on beyond buildings unlocking more troops and giving you more money. Perhaps I'm being harsh, but when growing large in this game, it's this aspect that drives you away and stops you from playing. Manually managing more than 20 towns is tedious when they all play the same, and I'm a big proponent of the concept that if you tick the auto whatever box, the game has failed you, because it's essentially revealed that not playing that aspect of the game is objectively more interesting than engaging with it. With that gripe out of the way, let's move on to something I adore about this game. The voicing of the characters. It's something so small, but the voice lines are still amusing 16 years later.
You are making the right choice. France has the Florins, sire. Oui, don't do it. You will regret it. Mon Dieu, non. Spare us, mon ami.
As well as this, the speeches are still well worth a listen.
Well, here's the thing. I look at our foes and I see nothing but arse weasels. A bunch of piss-a-bed, cod-nibbling, rotund hoof merchants and sheep-worrying gits.
It goes a long way to humanizing the characters that you move around the map, and leads me to what I believe is one of the most crucial features of this game: dynamic characters. What do I mean by this buzzword-sounding phrase? Well, the distinction between characters through traits, their own abilities, or even how they came to be a part of your faction makes the place feel alive. Moreover, it enables you to fully connect with said characters. Here's a great example. I auto-resolved a battle without a general, but was confronted with this screen after winning. Obviously, I was going to bring any man that had been singled out by the game into my faction, and later on this man died in a hopeless battle against the Scots, where the English troops valiantly fought to the last. There's one dude left fighting in this stupid formation. They are fighting to the death. The boys are holding them. Got one, James Taylor. Fight on, my friend. There he is. What a hero. Ugh.
Our general lies slain upon the battlefield.
Goodbye, James. Oh, and James Jr. This minor general, this nothing character that I had no part in creating, had a full story arc of his own. Characters can also be swayed away from your faction, or retire to a monastery after not having any children. It's something that I feel the modern Total War games fully lack. For instance, in Warhammer 3, if your leader falls in battle, they're merely wounded. However, if William the Conqueror charges into French pikes, that bitch is dead, and then suddenly a new king is crowned. That's right, your faction heir that you sent to quell the Irish is now the ruler of England. You have to really consider if that next battle is worth screwing the succession up for. There are some questionable mechanics, of course. Who can forget the frustration at being told that no, you can't just murder a bunch of fellow Catholics without good reason. That good reason being carefully managed papal relations, of course. In this case, I resolved to be a good Catholic boy and attempted to send my diplomat to negotiate with the French in good faith. Only to be told, lol jokes, you're excommunicated anyway. Which, to be fair, made my conquest against the French much easier. It meant I didn't have to go to Cairo for some dumb crusade, so I guess all good. I did, however, lose many hours of my life watching the same goddamn animations over and over again. If you forget to click this little button here, you're trapped, and there's nothing you can do about it. The game merely laughs at the mortality of man as you watch, trying to figure out in vain what the hell these random foreign princesses keep bowing about. There are some other nice little touches the game does that doesn't really fit anywhere else in the script. There are these little movie clips that play when an agent is attempting something. That's amazing. After all, who could forget the famous Pope assassination clip? The variety in minor characters is great. You have your assassins for assassinating, the diplomats for diplomacy, the merchants for merchanting, and much more, really adding to the dynamic feel I mentioned earlier. So here's my conclusion for if this game is actually as good as you remember. Well, first up, the camera is honestly terrible, both in the campaign map and the battle map. Speaking of, during the battles, units are questionable in their pathing and decision making, on both sides, resulting in a healthy mixture of prayer and advanced geometry to try and make them do what you want. The aforementioned building aspect gets dull very quickly. I found myself autoing on everything, which hurts because the AI doesn't know what the hell is going on, and role plays like a medieval lord that's been given control of a settlement because the king is too busy. Wait. But I guess the only thing you really need to know is that this game is so engaging that I ended up finishing the short campaign, taking great pleasure in vanquishing both the French and the Scots. It was 2 AM and I had to be up at 7 AM, but that didn't matter because this game made me feel at 23 the same way I did when I was 8. Completely immersed and unable to resist clicking the next turn button. So yes, it is actually as good as you remember. Go play it now. After you finish watching the video, because I'm not about to screw up my watch time for that. If ever there was a game that I'd need to walk on eggshells whilst talking about, it's Starcraft. Released in 1998, it's one of the best-selling PC games of all time, and is undoubtedly one of the pioneers of the real-time strategy genre. Many consider this to be one of the greatest games of all time, including GameSpot, though Game Informer placed it at 35th. See, what I did there was I cleverly redirected any potential anger you had at me towards Game Informer. I can't really put this off anymore, so let's jump into the game. What struck me first was the graphics, and here's my real-time reaction. Oh god, now that's a bit nostalgia, huh? It's been many years since I played StarCraft, and I was never any good. Mainly because I was of an age with the game, and I had more pressing matters in my life, like attempting to hold my breath for as long as possible. For this game, I decided to go through the tutorial again in order to judge it. First off, the UI is exactly what you'd want to see. It's uncluttered with no wasted space. Selecting a unit that's injured will tell you exactly how injured they are and where, with the added bonus of watching the different limbs of your units go dark as they're ripped apart by an unknown creature. The core gameplay is simple. Gather resources, build things, protect the base. The style is something that's been built on in the years since release, but the formula remains the same. And the reason why is that it just works. It's intuitive and makes sense. You can see the numbers ticking up and there's not much to wonder about. Ostensibly for context, but more to back up my point to legitimize my own opinions, it's worth mentioning that the US Air and Space Basic course used this game to teach officers about crisis planning and joint service teamwork. That's right, if you're a nerd back in the day and sunk hundreds of hours into this game, well, wake up, Captain, the Russians have launched World War III, and you're the best we've got. There is, however, one thing that I hate. The tutorial. Put simply, I think it's a horribly structured affair that places too many restrictions on the player. Each mission has a set list of objectives which you complete in order to win. The issue with this is that the early missions are dull, consisting of build X many of this, and the other buildings available in the game are locked. and unseen, forcing you to only complete the tutorial objectives. Now, I understand why this occurs. It's to teach the player. But personally, I believe that you should be able to build any building and play around with all mechanics in tutorial missions. It's sort of a sandbox where you have the safety to make mistakes and try out whatever you want to try out. The restriction of options make the game seem more bare than it actually is, and makes each stage dull as you're strapped into a chair and forced to learn the game the way the game wants you to, with the only freedom being the ability to murder your own troops. Having said this, the disdain with which the troops treated me was unexpected, but fair.
Permission to speak freely, sir. I'm not sure you know what you're doing. If you're going to send us into hostile territory and you want us to defend ourselves, then use the attack command.
One strength of this game is the soundtrack. I'm a sucker for a good one, and the right one can fully immerse you in the environment you find yourself in. It's an excellent blend that sits in the background and doesn't pull any attention away, but really conveys an off-world military theme. In terms that those of you born this century will understand, it has no right to slap this hard. On top of this, the voice acting is pretty good, with a solid story to boot that still holds up. What doesn't hold up is the stupid video transmission thing. I despise this with a passion. Looking at it makes my brain generate white noise as flashbacks of old TV sets start to play. I hated it back then and I hate it now. Honestly, nothing would have been better. A black square with an image of a rotting carcass would have been more pleasing to look at than this monstrosity. I'm aware that I might be angering some people here, but quite frankly, you know I'm right. So what are my conclusions? Starcraft is still a solid RTS game. However, its status as one of the fathers of the genre means that successive games took the formula and ran with it. This isn't a bad thing, not at all. It's a testament to the innovation of the time, but it does mean that this game doesn't hold up as well as it could. A remastered version has been released that updated the graphics as well as a few other minor things, but to be honest, and I know this is going to shock some people, I wouldn't recommend it. This is, in my opinion, a case of the value in playing it coming from nostalgia versus the actual mechanics and graphics. Full disclosure, I've always been biased against remasters, as I fully believe that you're one step away from bottling up chemicals in a vial with instructions to inject directly into your brain that imitates the effects of nostalgia. But maybe I'm just too cynical. In any case, StarCraft is an important piece of gaming history, but it's not as fun anymore. Mountain Blade Warband is definitely a different type of strategy game. It has strategy elements to it, but it's also a sandbox open world RPG. To some of you, Warband might not actually be a childhood game, but that's most likely because it was the most recent addition in the series for about 11 years. To start with, I'd like to show the developer that came up with the character creation screen what an actual human looks like. This lot looked like a walking advertisement for the Uncanny Valley. Moving on, the character creation has always felt a little lackluster. It's just not that immersive, more of a delivery system for additional ability points than an actual story. And then you have this. I've been accosted by this starting enemy 100 times or more. And I have to say, it's not the best way of kicking things off. I get it, there needs to be an initial encounter to start your adventure. I just wish it had a bit more flavor to it. Regardless, once this is over with, you are unceremoniously dumped into the world and left to fend for yourself. This is the best possible start to convey the sandbox aspect of this game. Not many games get this right, but in Warband you feel insignificant, but in a good way. The world feels populated and dynamic. If you were to camp here for 1,000 days, the globe keeps spinning. The beauty of this is that when you do have an impact on the world, however small, for example by raiding a village, it feels consequential. This then prompts a desire to raid, conquer, fight and more because it actually matters. Speaking of fighting, I'm going to break down combat into two elements, the strategic and the personal. Firstly, the strategic. The ability to command troops in real time as you stand amongst them will never not be incredibly satisfying. Calling for a hail of arrows on your foe as you shoot along with your men is a great feeling. However, the different ways of calling your men around, like stand 10 paces forward, is fundamentally irrelevant. Perhaps it's just me, but I've found that it doesn't really matter if you get your men to stand in a loose formation or a tight one, the outcome is still the same. Personal combat itself predominantly consists of directional blocking and attacking. It's not the most creative combat system and lacks any sort of flair, but to be honest, it does play to the strength of the game. For example, when everyone is bunched together and there's no room for anything beyond overhead strikes. I will say that ranged weapons are thoroughly enjoyable. Indeed, it's often more fun to prioritize this instead of jumping into the melee. Notice I've said little about cavalry because I personally despise it in this game, but I'm tempted to keep my opinions on that matter to myself in an attempt to appeal to this game's audience. But you know I'm right. Here's the thing. Anything in these contexts, Bannerlord just does better. Bannerlord is better than Warband in almost every way, and that means that Tellworlds have done their job well. So, is that it? Is the conclusion that Warband just isn't as good as you remember? No. For one very good reason. Mods. I don't know of any other game with such a variety in depth and mods as Warband. Bannerlord's modding scene is still in its infancy, and lacks the years of development that Warband has had. It's impossible to list them all, so for the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on the Viking Conquest expansion. Now, here's my justification. It stems from the Britain Worlder mod, so has that aspect to it, but was also developed by Tailworlds, meaning that it has that official seal of approval, and so I can justify using it as a basis. Additionally, it was released in 2014, giving this video a roughly 15-year time span, so the title is fully justified regardless of how old you are. Unless you're in that small percentage that grew up with Pong, in which case, good on you, mate. Role-playing as a Roman named Atrascus was what I did back in the day, so I saw fit to emulate that now. Make no mistake, this expansion suffers from all the downsides of Warband, namely the janky combat and such, but it does improve on it in a whole host of ways. Firstly, the soundtrack is glorious. I mean, just listen to it. You try and tell me that doesn't get you in the mood to sail across the channel and establish yourself in medieval England. It's a beautiful mix of stirring with a touch of loneliness that burrows longing deep into your brain against your wishes. Buoyed by this, you then come to the story. By story, I'm talking of the main one, and I'm not even going to spoil it. By some miracle, if you've come into this video not knowing how the story goes, then you're welcome, because I've just saved you the pleasure of experiencing it firsthand. I'm not saying it's the pinnacle of creative writing, but it does fit the setting remarkably well, and if you know anything about the time period at all, it's quite the treat. But there are bugs. By God, are there bugs. My personal recommendation is to make several saves and keep them well away from one another. The pain of a lost save is hard to articulate, especially with how grindy this game is. I will say, if you're averse to the concept of the grind, you really might not enjoy the base game, not to mention the Viking Conquest expansion, which is even more grindy. So we come to my final conclusion. Is it as good as you remember? The base game? It's not as good as Bannerlord. I'm sure I'm ruffling the feathers of some purists, but that's the objective truth. Once you throw mods and all that flavour into the mix, then you've got a reason to pick this over Bannerlord. I do hope that mods in Bannerlord eventually become as diverse and as commonplace as Warband, but until then, I'm off to go raid the Welsh. For someone as opinionated as myself, it's strange that this is my first review style video. If you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, or more video essay styles from me, do let me know. In any case, consider liking this video and subscribing if you enjoyed, it really does help us out, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.
Shout out to our Patreons: J Erickson321, Shadowsinger, Jado52, Kargon, Flyerton, Henriki, Redguard76, Xiaomi, and Charlie Demerel. Your support means a lot, guys.